yet still must learn how to utilize the power of the mind, positive thinking, meditation, and visualization.
Amount, like they, to the degree that they wanted. Well, the sand would be bigger than the holes you need to do this, some of this work anyway. There's just no way. Lasers, this is not even an inch square here. Lasers would have a hard time doing this if they could do it. Nobody knows how they did this. They're just pulling one out of the hat on you. Okay, next slide. This is the one I want you to see. This is a much older one, much more worn, as you can see. 4,500 years, 4,500 years, 2,500 BC. It's called it's VA 243. It's in a museum in Berlin. It's well dated. And it's called the granting of the plow. This is a seated God. See him in his chair with a plow in his hand. And this is a standing God, and this is a human. How do we know they're gods? Because they have horns on their helmets. Horns on their helmets. Notice the horns. This is how you signify gods, or they did anyway, the Sumerians did on their cylinder seals. And I want you to pay special attention to this, because later at the banquet we might see a real live Anunnaki helmet. We might see that. Okay, now, normally they would put astronomical signs up here to indicate who the god was, because not everybody would know. But in this one, obviously, everybody knew. And as you can see, this the human is carrying this kind of skunky old digging stick that the most primitive people have, even to this day. And this new wooden plow here, 4,500 years ago, we can go to Egypt today and see this very plow, and in many other third world countries still being used, this very plow. Okay, so no question it's the granting of the plow. But this is what makes this special right here. Let's see a blow-up of that. What is this? Solar system, right. Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, in their relative sizes, mind you. Earth, Moon, think how small that is. What grain of sand dug that out? Mars, and then, what should be here? This should be the asteroid belt. This is Nibiru, folks. Nibiru. Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto as a moon of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Notice that it's only a little bit bigger than Uranus, Neptune. It's about 3 times bigger than Earth. Nibiru is a good-sized planet. Good-sized planet, according to this. Okay? Now, again, what proof do we have of any of this? Let's take a look at this. All right. Here's a look at the solar system that you don't get to very often. And did it occur to any of you that we were looking at a cylinder seal carved at 4,500 years ago that had Uranus in it that we only discovered in 1781 when our telescopes got good enough to see it? It had Neptune, when we discovered in 1846 when our telescopes got good enough to see it, and Pluto, which we discovered in 1930 when our mathematicians got good enough to tell our astronomers where to look for the thing because it was so small. What are the Sumerians doing knowing about that? Furthermore, what are they doing writing in one of their tablets that if you look at these two, Uranus and Neptune, in the heavens, meaning right out on them, they look like blue-green watery twins? When we didn't find that out, we thought they were just big old gas bags like Jupiter and Saturn until Voyager went out there in 86 and 89 and found that, lo and behold, they really are blue-green watery twins. What the Sumerians said 4,500 years ago. Furthermore, they didn't count the way we do. Earth was not the third rock from the sun for them. It was number 7. So that means they were counting from out here, and they were putting Pluto in its correct place. What are they doing with all that knowledge? Well, they make no bones about it. They say everything that we know, everything that we are, everything that we have comes from the people living on Nibiru. The people living on Nibiru came to Earth and gave us everything that we have, everything that we know, our great culture. Now, what's the proof of that? Is there any proof that any ancient advanced civilization was ever on Earth at any point in the dim or distant past? Yes, yes. The megalithic structures out there, the pyramids, Tiwanaku, Baalbek, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge, you name it. A couple of dozen of them. All of those are impossible for human beings to recreate today. And yet we are told in another one of these great fantasies that they were somehow created by people in ancient times, ancient Egyptians or ancient Sumerians or anybody. Somehow or other they did it. And it's just absolute malarkey. Impossible. Now, next slide. Some Egyptian scholars tried to prove it by getting down in with some pink granite here and wailing away with some stones for a few hours and tore their hands up and walked out of there saying, well, you know, we couldn't make much of a dent in it, but boy, you know, those old folks, they sure had a lot of time on their hands, and somehow they figured out a way to do it. Wouldn't give an inch after this. Wouldn't give an inch. It's ridiculous. Now, here's the stone they're working on. Next slide. Some of you may have seen this. This is an ancient 1,170-ton obelisk lies unfinished at the Aswan quarry. A crack rendered the stone unusable. It's pink granite. They were making it into an obelisk like the one you saw in Alan's slides. Okay? It's about 100 feet long. It's about 12 feet wide, 12 feet deep on the side. Imagine the Washington Monument, just squared off. And it's pretty much done. But now let's move this from the Stone Age. Let's move it through the age of copper, because copper wouldn't make a dent in that. And let's move it into the Bronze Age. Bronze will chip on it. Bronze will take a little bit of it out. Now, let's put our bronze chisels or hatchets or whatever in the hands of some guys and get them down in this crack and put them to work. How do you think they're going to fare in there? Pretty tight fit. Plastic Man might have a tough time up in there. But the point is, they've got it pretty much done. They're working on the spire here. When they break it, you know how it works. You press here, you get this. Well, look, does this look like somebody chipping away with a little hand? No. This looks like a belt sander taking pieces out the size of the chair you're sitting on. Huge chunks of pink granite, one of the hardest stones in the world, just being ripped out. And they press too hard with whatever machine they've got here, and you know your physics. You get stress back here, and they popped it. They broke it. And they just said, whoops, we busted that one. And they just unhooked it and went somewhere else and left it for us to marvel at and wonder how they could have done it. But now let's go ahead and say they didn't bust it and they finished it. These primitive people now who managed somehow to do this. They finished it. It's ready to go. The hole, by the way, is about 15 feet deep. That's the top of it up there. But still, what's the first thing they've got to do? Somebody's got to draw straws to get down there with his hatchet and cut it loose from the bottom. Now, who's going to do that with 1,100 tons sitting on top of him? We could not get our best diamond-tipped blades to cut through underneath this thing. The weight would stop the blade. We could not. The operative word here is impossible. We could not get this out of here. And yet they did it time and time and time again. To lift it out, just if we could somehow cut it loose, we would have to take a dozen of our largest movable cranes to wring that hole just to get it up. You're being lied to, folks. That's the main thing you got to understand. You're being lied to. It's absolutely impossible for this one stone. This one stone proves that none of the megaliths were made by those people in that era. And this, again, is not the biggest one. They have them in Baalbek twice that big. Okay? Next slide. All right. What we're told is that the Anunnaki came to Earth for this, gold, mining gold. And that originally the story is they landed in ancient Sumer, but not 6,000 years ago, 400,000 years ago, 430,000 approximately to be exact. 400,000 years ago they land in modern-day Iraq, and they set up shop in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and they call their home away from home, their home away from Nibiru, the Eden. You'll see a poster out there by my thing, Anunnaki over Eden. That's what that means. Because that poster is the Tigris River Valley that the symbol is rising above. That is where it was. That is where Eden was, according to them, and that comes down in the Bible as such. So they set up camp and they placer mined the gold out of those rivers. What do they need gold for? They needed to repair their atmosphere. And their rise to high technology, they had damaged that big, 3 times the size of Earth atmosphere, the same exact way we're damaging ours in our rise to high technology. And they ultimately had to repair it with very fine particulates of gold, like talcum powder, blown up into the stratosphere above it so it would ride above there and act as a reflector and an insulator from cosmic rays, which is, you know, you see that on the masks of astronauts and in the capsule and all that. Gold is a wonderful stopper of cosmic rays. So that's what they had to repair it with. It's what we will have to repair it with. We'll have to do exactly the same thing when the day comes for us to have to face up to what we're doing to our planet. Okay? So they came, they place her mind out of the river, and all that is you put a tray in the water, you let the water sweep over, the water drops the gold into these cloth. Every few weeks you pick it up, and it's real easy. It's the way we do it now when we have the opportunity. But you tap out any stream system, ultimately, and they did. After about 150,000 years, they had tapped it out. And so they decided they were going to split themselves up and go where the mother lode of gold was on the planet Earth, which is what it is today, Southern Africa. So they divided themselves into the upper world, which remained the Eden, and the Abzu, which was the lower world, and you didn't want to go to the lower world because you had to get in the holes and dig the gold. And they didn't like it. So the Anunnaki revolted. They said, we don't want to do this. We want a slave to do this work for us. Plus, it was a hardship duty, mostly men. You know, why don't you make us some women while you're at it? So that's what they did. They decided to use the creatures of Earth, which would be the hominoids, and I say it would have been the Almas, the likeliest candidate. They took the creatures of Earth to get some of their genetic material to make the new slave better adapted physically to the planet than they were, but the slave would, for the most part, be like themselves. We shall make the Adamu, A-D-A-M-U, which comes down as Adam, and we shall make the Adamu in our own image, after our own likeness, which comes down word for word. And that is what they did. They made their slave inferior models of themselves. That's us, folks. That's us. We're really inferior models of the Anunnaki. And as you saw in the cylinder seal, we look like them. We look like, in their own image, after their own likeness. In all of the cylinder seals, we look just like them. We don't have the horns on our headgear. That's about it. We are them. That's why we're not adapted to this planet. That's why we're so obviously not a part of this planet. We have their bones. We don't have primate bones. We have their muscles. We don't have primate muscles. We have their skin. We don't have primate skin. We have their body pattern, their hair patterns on their body is ours. We have thickest on our front, thinnest on our back. Primates have thick on the back, thin on the front. We have their eyes, their poor night vision eyes. We have their foreheads. We have their brains. That's the key to this. We have their brains. That's why we're not like anything else on this planet. We are them. We are genetically engineered copies of them. Okay, next slide. Let's take a look at how that was done. Human body contains 100 trillion cells. There's a nucleus inside each human cell except red blood cells. Each nucleus contains 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. One chromosome of every pair is from each parent. The chromosomes are filled with tightly coiled strands of DNA. Genes are segments of DNA that contain instructions to make proteins, the building blocks of life. This is where genetic engineering takes place. Now, we're going to go over it lightly, but it's very important. I want you to understand these things that I'm going to tell you now. Okay, next slide. Don't worry about the details and how they do it. This is what they do. They can open up a cell, our genetic engineers can, our geneticists can. We can open up a cell, open up the nucleus, pull out strands of DNA, and in that strand, 98% of it will be what's called junk DNA. We don't know what it does. If it has a function, we don't know what it is. 2% will be what are called, prosaically enough, the working segments. They work. They do what they're supposed to do. They make the proteins. Now, if you cut in the junk above a working segment and in the junk below and remove it, and have done the same with another strand of DNA over here, you can move anything into anything else. It can be animal into plant, plant into animal, fish into fowl. It does not matter, because all living things at the most fundamental level are exactly alike. Understand that. We're all made of the same 4 base pairs, the same 20 amino acids. Everything is the same at the most basic level. It's like it's pop beads that are interchangeable. It is almost as if somebody designed it that way so they could just mix and match the parts and make anything they wanted. Isn't it? Something to think about. Okay, but the problem with it from an engineering standpoint is this. You're not cutting with a blade. These are not precise cuts. The blade would have to be a few molecules thick. You're cutting with chemicals. Chemicals. Now, The chemicals can cut pretty accurately, but mistakes are going to happen. Something's going to ooze out where it doesn't belong. Something's going to splash over it where it doesn't belong. Mistakes are going to happen. Inevitable.